Last video, I covered the endgame of every major faction in Warhammer 40,000. Two of you independently asked the same question. One wrote, "What about my kin? Where is the Leagues of Votann at, lad?" The other kept it to 3 words: Votann, rock, and stone. Fair, they were missing. Here's the full treatment, and it's longer than you might expect because the Leagues of Votann have the most structurally unusual endgame in the entire setting. Not the most powerful trajectory, the most structurally unusual. Their endgame is the only one in 40,000 driven not by conquest, not by consumption, not by reversing something an outside force did to them, but by the slow internal failure of the very system that holds their civilization together. And if they win the race they're running, it quietly breaks every cascade model we've built for everyone else. Before any of that lands, you need to understand what a Votann actually is. Picture the first human mining fleets departing pre-Imperial Terra. Deep prehistory, before the Age of Strife began, before the Imperium had a name. Each fleet carried something extraordinary. Highly advanced artificial intelligences called ancestor cores, or Votann. The mission was specific. Exploit the resource-dense galactic core, the region surrounding the supermassive black hole at the galaxy's heart, where gravitational forces alone eliminate most species as settlement candidates. Survive terrain no human had ever survived. The ancestor cores were the guidance system, the accumulated intelligence the colonists would rely on across millennia, in territory no one had mapped. 10,000 years later, those cores are still running. Ancestor cores are ancient quantum computers, Gestalt repositories of unimaginable inherited wisdom and knowledge, per the Lexicanum's direct citations from the Codex. The word Gestalt is working hard in that description. Each core doesn't just store data from its original programming. Since the first fleets anchored in the galactic core, every generation of kin has added to the total. When a kin dies, their cerebral data is uploaded into their kindred's ancestor core in a practice called returning to the ancestors. Every asteroid field mapped, every military engagement survived, every trade negotiation concluded, all of it gets folded into the core's data stacks, layer upon layer, for 10,000 years. The Iron Kin add to the weight as well. These are the AI citizens of kin society, self-aware robotic beings treated as full equals by organic kin, participating in every aspect of kin civilization. When an Iron Kin dies, their accumulated memories return to the ancestors alongside biological kin. The 10th edition Codex is explicit. The cores have also accepted into themselves the accumulated and often duplicated data of endless generations of dead kin and Iron Kin. 2 categories of citizens, both uploading, both compounding the burden simultaneously. What began as pure practicality has become a religious ritual. The kin view it as the closest thing their otherwise secular culture has to an afterlife. To never return to the ancestors is the worst punishment in kin society. Exile, your name told to the core so every league and kindred knows to refuse you entrance. The horror isn't death or loneliness. The horror is that your life meant nothing to the record. That framing matters because it means the practice driving the degradation can't be stopped. The kin can no more halt the uploading of their dead than the Imperium could stop venerating the Emperor. It's what they are. The cores also hold every standard template construct schematic the original fleets carried. Weapon blueprints, ship designs, biological engineering protocols, geological analysis systems. The complete technical library of a civilization operating at humanity's absolute technological peak. Kin called Grimnir use Fane interface terminals, located in the most heavily defended section of every hold, to consult the cores directly. The cores deliberate, sometimes for years, increasingly for decades. Each core also functions as head of state. The Lexicanum is unambiguous. The head of state of the Leagues of Votann is listed simply as the ancestor cores, not symbolic leadership, Operational governance. An interstellar confederation spanning the galactic core, a third of Segmentum Solar, and several thousand mining worlds runs on the decisions of these systems. And the systems are failing. The degradation mechanism is documented across multiple forms in the 9th and 10th edition codexes. Warhammer Community's official faction explainer, drawing from the codex directly, states it plainly. The ceaseless deluge of data has begun to strain their capabilities and the limits of their data stacks, causing each individual Votann to start developing its own quirks, inconsistencies, and faults. The Lexicanum provides the causal mechanism. The creators didn't design them with this in mind, and even cogitators of near limitless power can eventually run out of memory. The failure modes are specific and sequential. Cognitive slowdown hits first. Queries that once returned in moments now take decades, or in some cases, centuries, to resolve. The Warhammer Community article uses that exact framing. Some ancestor cores can now take decades, or even centuries, to deliver the same solution. A head of state responding on a century delay is a head of state the civilization is already routing around, building workarounds that assume the guidance will be erratic rather than reliable. Then come the eccentricities. The cores develop distinct personalities as their decision trees fragment and recombine in patterns the original design never anticipated. The Lexicanum describes them becoming more eccentric and mercurial each passing year. This isn't benign variation. The Fane article in the Lexicanum records a specific terminal point. More than one ancestor core has degraded to the point of becoming little more than a Fane itself. Reduced from a governing superintelligence to a simple relay terminal, incapable of deliberation, capable only of passing messages. The Codex describes this as a great calamity. It has already happened more than once. Then come the knowledge gaps. Each generation of kin receives fewer complete STC blueprints, thinner guidance, increasingly unreliable counsel on decisions the core was originally designed to handle with certainty. There is one rare counterpoint. Occasionally, through means not understood even by the kin themselves, a Fane develops its own artificial intelligence and joins the ranks of the Votann. A new core emerged spontaneously from an interface terminal. The Fane article calls these techno-miracles, causes of great celebration in whichever kindred they occur. They demonstrate that new cores can emerge. The rate of spontaneous emergence, however, has never approached the rate of degradation accumulating across a civilization's worth of cores, simultaneously absorbing every death. The confirmed hard endpoints tell the story. One ancestor core entered complete silence in cycle 743 of M41. No recovery documented. And then there's the case that shows what tyrannid contact does to a core already under stress. The Emberg-Egnir block was a functioning league. Hive Fleet Leviathan consumed it. Every hold, every kin, every ironkin. Each death fed back into the core in the usual fashion. Every mind returning to the ancestors as the culture demanded. But the sheer volume of pain and desolation from an entire civilization's simultaneous annihilation overloaded a system that was already accumulating strain. The Votann of the Emberg-Ognir block descended into insanity, not gradual eccentricity, but active psychic madness, fueled by the absorbed pain and desolation of the deceased. Every surviving league was told to avoid that region of space entirely. Buri Ognirson, the last survivor of the block, still carries that loss. The core still runs, just wrong, and in ways that make proximity dangerous to any kin who approaches. That is the failure state the kin are managing at civilizational scale, across every core, every day. The ordinary version is simply slower. For anyone without deep 40,000 background, the closest real-world parallel is this. Imagine your civilization's entire technical library, cultural memory, and governmental intelligence are stored in a single supercomputer. Irreplaceable, built by engineers who have been dead for 10,000 years, still accepting data uploads from every person who dies, and running measurably slower each century with no known path to building another one. The title promises strangest. That word requires a structural defense, so here's the comparison that earns it. Every major faction's endgame organizes around one of three drivers. Expansion. Tyranids consume biomass and move to the next galaxy. Orcs build toward a galaxy-spanning Wa. Chaos corrupts and destroys outward from the Eye of Terror. Reversal of an external event. The Silent King's Necrons pursue the undoing of biotransference, attempting to reclaim what the C'tan stripped from the Necron tier. Preservation against an external predator. The Craftworld Eldar use Spirit Stones and Craftworld Infinity Circuits to prevent Slaanesh from consuming their souls. The Votann don't fit any of these. Their crisis has no external cause. The Necron comparison looks closest on the surface because both involve a civilization attempting to halt a catastrophic transformation of its fundamental nature. The distinction is what caused the transformation. Necron biotransference was performed on the Necron tier by an external agent. The C'tan deceived them, harvested their souls, delivered immortality with a hidden price. The catastrophe has an identifiable external architect, an event to trace, a direction in which to aim. You can, at least in principle, locate the problem and point at it. Votann degradation has no external cause. The cores are failing because the kin are too successful. Tens of thousands of years of dead kin returning to the ancestors, doing exactly what their culture demands, exactly what their ancestor worship requires, have accumulated beyond what the original design can process. The mechanism that preserves the kin is also what kills the cores that preserve them. No betrayal to undo, no enemy to locate, no reversal target. The accumulated weight of their own survival is what breaks them. The Eldar comparison is instructive differently. Craftworld Eldar upload dead souls into infinity circuits, their own version of preserving consciousness in machine systems, serving a structurally similar cultural purpose. Both civilizations encode their dead into thinking machines to prevent that knowledge from being lost. But the Eldar face Slaanesh as an external predator generating the threat from outside. The kin face internal accumulation generating the threat from within. The Eldar are being hunted. The kin are drowning in their own history. Both are preservationist civilizations in decline, but the mechanism is structurally inverted. Chaos drives outward. Tyranids drive outward. Orcs drive outward. All three are forces of expansion. Their endgame is always something they do to others, never something they failed to prevent within themselves. The Necrons reclaim what was taken. The Eldar preserve against what hunts them. These are reactive to external causes. The Votann are fighting something with no face, no location, and no solution anyone has found in 10,000 years. Their existential pressure generates internally from successful operation. No external actor is responsible. No enemy can be identified and fought. That structural distinction is precise and defensible. The Votann endgame is the only one in 40,000, driven by internal accumulation from the successful execution of the civilization's own preservation mechanism. That's what makes it the strangest endgame. Not the most dramatic, not the most powerful, the most structurally unusual, and the one that, for modeling purposes, has been consistently left out of the cascade. Understanding why that omission matters requires knowing what's actually stored in those failing cores. The first ancestors departed from what the Codex describes as almost certainly pre-Imperial Terra, setting out for the galactic core aboard generation ships before the Age of Strife began. The ancestor cores they carried were products of humanity's dark age of technology, the setting's designated peak of human scientific achievement before the warp storms of the Age of Strife collapsed interstellar civilization, and the knowledge collapse that followed destroyed most of what humanity had built. The Lexicanum cites this directly. The practice of memory inheritance among the kin harks back to their earliest origins as creations of humanity's dark age of technology. This makes the Leagues something specific that most faction discussions miss entirely. They are custodians of a technological inheritance that no longer exists anywhere else in the setting. The Adeptus Mechanicus treats standard template constructs as sacred relics because they are partial blueprints from an era humanity can no longer replicate from scratch. The kin have been working with complete, functional versions of those same blueprints for 10,000 years, and their engineers, the Brokir, have been improving on them. Where Mechanicus doctrine treats inherited technology as sacred text that must not be altered, the Brokir treat it as a baseline for refinement. The Lexicanum notes they modify and improve the original STCs in a manner that would horrify the Imperium. The specific technology gap is substantial and documented. Where the Imperium fields plasma weapons that can catastrophically overload and kill their operators, Votann plasma doesn't explode. The Lexicanum's armory includes Volkite weapons, a class of energy weapon the Imperium largely lost after the Horus Heresy, graviton blast weapons, and conversion beamers. Their warships carry Geller ramparts of superior design and reliability to anything the Imperium currently fields. Even their smaller commerce vessels match most other species' cruisers in armored bulk and firepower. Communication between holds runs near instantaneously through Fane networks. No astropathic choirs, no psychers, no lives spent maintaining the link. Outside the galactic core, the kin have been misidentified as completely different races by multiple species across centuries of contact. The Demiurge by the Tau, the Heliosi Ancients by the Eldar, the Nostari and the Kreg by others. That consistent misidentification isn't accidental. The kin maintain it deliberately. They are careful, per the Lexicanum, not to reveal their links to ancient humanity on Terra, and they hide the Ancestor Core's true nature from all outsiders. The practical reason is obvious. An outside faction understanding that a regional civilization holds complete DAOT technical libraries would draw different conclusions about the cost of attacking it. Games Workshop has confirmed in-universe that at humanity's dark age of technology peak, human civilization, pre-fall Eldar, and the Necrons were on roughly equivalent technological footing. Different domains of expertise, similar overall ceiling. The Necrons are the galaxy's self-proclaimed supreme technological inheritors. The kin are a civilization that preserved and continued developing off that same era's technical base while the rest of humanity collapsed through the Age of Strife and spent 10,000 years trying to recover what it had forgotten. They're running below that ceiling right now. Core degradation means each generation receives a thinner inheritance, more incomplete schematics, stranger guidance. What they're racing to preserve is the surviving technical legacy of the era when humanity stood alongside the Necrons as one of the galaxy's greatest civilizations, and 10,000 years of Brokir incremental improvements on top of that foundation. Every kin action flows from a single cultural equation. Resources are survival, and waste is a moral failing. The Leagues spent their formative millennia in the galactic core, hostile enough to eliminate most species as settlement candidates. Extreme gravitational forces, dense stellar clusters, exotic radiation environments. The kin survived there because they could extract materials other civilizations couldn't reach using methods other civilizations wouldn't attempt. The Lexicanum records their industrial capability, disassembling newborn stars with particle excavators, refining elements undreamt of from the stellar fusion harvest, stripping planets to their cores, hunting space creatures for harvesting, extracting exotic materials from warp-adjacent space. Populated worlds don't automatically receive exemption. The calculus is always cost versus benefit. A direct in-universe text excerpt from the Gallodark supplement frames the motivation precisely. It's agreed, derived from the existential dread of a grim dark galaxy. Not agreed, derived from a desire for fulfillment or self-aggrandizement. The kin aren't hoarding because they're acquisitive in the ordinary sense. They're hoarding because a civilization that has survived 10,000 years in the galaxy's most hostile territory by never going without understands exactly what happens to civilizations that do. The Ymir conglomerate makes the resource status link explicit. Entry into one of the most elite leagues requires either exceptional craftsmanship from the Brokir or control of territory that yields a suitably spectacular bounty of raw materials. The fandom wiki notes there's no stigma in buying entry via resources rather than skill. The kin are practical enough to recognize that even the most skilled artisans accomplish nothing without material to work with. Resource access and civilizational standing are directly linked at the league level. The Cronus hegemony adds a different dimension. A newly formed league whose Votann became so ravenous for knowledge and resources that the hegemony has since set out on an aggressive warpath. This is one of the few cases in current lore where a core's stated internal drive appears to push directly toward resource acquisition. And the fact that it's happening in the hegemony's early development suggests the hunger may intensify as a core settles in and begins mapping what it needs against what it has. Whether specific materials maintain core function isn't spelled out in the codex. What is documented, a core that wants more resources drives its league outward to get them. The leagues trade with other civilizations when the math supports it. Their historical relationship with the Tau runs back further than Tau records accurately reflect. The kin operated for centuries as the demiurge in Tau documentation, trading and engaging commercially before anyone outside the galactic core understood what they were dealing with. They trade with the Eldar. They negotiate with whoever has something worth having, and they fight whoever has something worth having and won't negotiate. None of this is ideology. It's applied survivalism by a civilization that has never had the luxury of sentimentality about resources. Right now, the leagues operate below their design capacity. The cores run slowly. Guidance is increasingly erratic. STC knowledge is incomplete in places it wasn't incomplete a century ago. The Confederation functions, but its central governing intelligence responds on century-delayed timescales and produces counsel that grows stranger each generation. At full capacity, the parameters were extraordinary. Cores were designed to run complete STC libraries, manage full genomic data for a clone civilization, absorb the memories of every kin and ironkin who died, oversee crucible production, and provide real-time strategic guidance to an interstellar confederation, simultaneously, with response times measured in moments rather than centuries. If degradation were halted or reversed, every incomplete STC schematic becomes functional again. Decision-making speed recovers to original parameters. The Brokir work from a complete technical library instead of an increasingly patchy one. The Confederation's strategic coordination operates on guidance that is responsive rather than eccentric and centuries delayed. Crucially, the Brokir have been improving on the inherited DAOT technology for 10,000 years of incremental refinement. A recovered core library combined with 10,000 years of Brokir improvements on top of it represents something DAOT humanity itself never had. The original peak knowledge plus a civilizational lifetime of development since. A Votann peak isn't a restoration to a prior state. It's a restoration to a prior state that has been continuously refined since that state was first achieved. The current territorial footprint, galactic core, a third of segmentum solar, several thousand mining worlds, belongs to a civilization operating below its design ceiling. Their population already exceeds the Tau empires. Their fleet warships already match other species' cruisers at the smaller end of the range. Their clone skines suppressed warp presence enough to make chaos corruption of organic kin extremely difficult. A Votann peak doesn't produce slightly stronger dwarves. It produces a civilization recovering access to a complete DAOT technical inheritance, plus 10,000 years of documented improvements, with functional governance and full crucible production. That changes the cascade in 3 directions. The most materially direct intersection is the Tyranid resource equation, and it doesn't require complex analysis to understand. A hive fleet is a living armada whose purpose is consuming raw biomass and raw materials from target systems. Strip a world, process the mass, grow larger, move on. The Tyranid endgame is a galaxy stripped clean. Every world, every asteroid field, every energy-dense stellar body converted to hive fleet growth. The hive mind categorizes everything as material available or material not yet available. The kin operate the same resource economy. They dismantle asteroids, drain stellar bodies, strip planets to their cores. The galactic core, resource-dense, energy-rich, full of rare minerals and exotic matter that exists nowhere else in the galaxy, is simultaneously the League's homeland and exactly the territory the hive mind would want to process. Historically, the core's extreme environmental conditions served as a partial natural barrier. The same conditions that made it viable only for the kin made large-scale hive fleet penetration difficult. The Great Rift changed that calculus. Multiple new warp storms emerged simultaneously across the core. Orgver, Girok, Tyrol, Cyclop, and others, severing trade routes and forcing kindreds to relocate holdings into wider galactic space, precisely the space where Tyranid contact becomes more plausible. The 9th edition Codex confirms active competition already in progress. Some kindreds actively stalk Tyranid splinter fleets, striking at isolated hive ships in order to harvest their resources. Deliberate policy, not improvised desperation. The same codex describes the kin calling the Tyranids the Bane, affording them the careful respect due to an extremely dangerous predator. That wary respect hasn't stopped certain kindreds from treating hive ship kills as a resource acquisition exercise, harvesting the hive fleet's own biological material as raw stock. The Emberg-Agnir block showed what happens when the competition goes fully wrong. Hive fleet Leviathan consumed an entire league. One survivor. One insane core. A region of space every remaining league must avoid. The consequence of losing to the Tyranids isn't just military defeat. It's civilizational annihilation, plus a corrupted archive locked inside a machine that can never be safely accessed again. A Votann civilization at peak changes this equation. More kindreds operational, more mining concerns active in the galactic core and adjacent territories, more physical mass under active kin exploitation. Mass the hive mind can't process because someone is actively using it, defending it, and in some cases, already harvesting it from the hive fleet's own ships before the fleet can consolidate. The Tyranid endgame assumes a galaxy that can be stripped clean. A Votann civilization at full operational capacity means a large portion of the galaxy's most materially valuable territory is held by a faction that has been exploiting it since before the Age of Strife, fights back efficiently, and doesn't leave anything available for secondary consumption. The Necron intersection is a narrative problem more than a military one, and it matters precisely because of how Necron civilization is internally organized. The Necrons woke from 60 million years of dormancy with a specific self-conception. They are the oldest, most technologically advanced civilization in the galaxy, the rightful inheritors of a universe they predate by geological timescales. The Settan betrayed the Necrontyr during the war in heaven, trading immortality for their souls, and the Silent King now pursues biotransference reversal to reclaim what was lost. But the technological supremacy survived the transaction. The Necron claim is that no species alive matches them, because no species alive has ever stood where they once stood. When the Necrons survey their reclaimed galaxy, what they find is chaos, which doesn't compete on the technological axis. The Tyranids, a biological threat vector rather than a technological peer. A fractured imperium that treats its own inherited technology as sacred mystery requiring ritual maintenance and can't reliably reproduce what its predecessors understood intuitively. Orcs, who innovate through psychic field effects and accumulated scrap. The Tau, a young civilization on an ascending curve but still far below any ancient ceiling. The Eldar remnants, operating off knowledge from before the fall. None of these challenge the Necron narrative of supreme technological inheritance in a fundamental way. The Leagues of Votann are the exception. Games Workshop has confirmed in-universe that at humanity's dark age of technology peak, human civilization and Necron technology were on roughly equivalent footing, different areas of specialization, similar overall ceiling. Doubt humanity wasn't Necron tier in every domain, but it operated in the same technological conversation. The Kin are a civilization that preserved and continued developing off that Doubt technical base. Their existence is a standing counterexample to the Necron claim that nobody else has ever operated at the level of the ancient galaxy's greatest civilizations. The Necron dynasty system runs on prestige and historical precedence. Pharaons establish status through claims of technological capability and preeminence. The entire justification for Necron reclamation of the galaxy is historical precedence and uniquely superior capability. A standing counterexample to that claim, a living civilization with intact Doubt technology actively improving on it, undermines the argument without firing a weapon. The Necrons don't need to fight the Kin to be affected by a Votann peak. A Votann civilization operating at its design ceiling, cores restored or stabilized, full STC access recovered, Brokir working from a complete rather than degraded inherited knowledge base, is no longer a partially functioning archive slowly forgetting itself. It's a civilization running at the technical level humanity achieved when humanity stood alongside the Necrons as peers. The Necrons' narrative of being alone at the top of ancient achievement simply becomes factually incorrect. Not a military threat, a historical fact that contradicts the story the Necrons tell themselves and each other about why they are the galaxy's rightful inheritors. In a faction organized around that story, that contradiction has consequences that don't require a single battle to manifest. The Tau endgame model assumes an exponential improvement curve, better technology with each sphere of expansion, faster development from an ascending baseline, the greater good absorbing innovations from every species it encounters. The Tau self-conception as the galaxy's ascending technological power assumes the trajectory only goes upward, and that nobody else is ascending faster from a higher starting point. The Votann already complicate this in the current era. On warp drive technology, the Kin are superior in reliability and precision. The Tau's AL-38 slipstream module gets there faster, but arrives approximately rather than accurately. Ion technology. The Tau are leaders in their specific application. Conversion beamers, Volkite weapons, graviton systems. Kin advantages the Tau haven't replicated. The Kin operate from a higher technical baseline that is currently degraded. The Tau operate from a lower baseline that is currently ascending. Both are moving in opposite directions, from opposite floors, on timescales that don't obviously converge in the Tau's favor. The Tau have known the Kin for centuries, long enough that Tau records identified them as the Demiurge, as commercial partners of long standing, whose full civilizational scope wasn't understood. What the Tau understood as a useful trade partner, technically proficient, commercially reliable, operating at manageable scale, turns out to be the visible face of a civilization spanning the galactic core that has been deliberately concealing its true scale and technological depth. The Tau cascade model doesn't account for a competitor, who isn't innovating upward from a lower floor, but recovering toward a higher prior state. The ascending curve model treats the race as beginning from roughly equivalent recent points and tracking who develops faster. The kin didn't start from a recent equivalent point. They started from the dark age of technology and have been in managed decline ever since. A Votann peak means the partner the Tau have traded with across centuries is now operating at a technical ceiling the Tau haven't reached, and the full scale of the gap only becomes visible once the degradation stops. Every cascade model of the 40K endgame treats the Leagues of Votann as background actors. Tough fighters, valuable trading partners, regionally significant. The chain a commenter mapped out in the last video, Tyranids pulling Orcs, pulling Tau, pulling Necrons into Chaos, into Eldar, each reshaping the others, had no Votann anywhere in it. That's not just a coverage gap, it's an analytical error. The Votann endgame doesn't look like any other factions because it isn't structured like any other factions. Every other endgame in the setting points outward, toward Conq.